Good morning. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. On the program today, we're going to talk about what combination of retirement accounts you can have. People often think, well, I'm doing the 401k, so that may restrict me in terms of what I can do in terms of maybe an IRA or a Roth. We're going to try and put some sense to those decisions that have things to do with your dollars today as it relates to what combination of retirement accounts you can have, along with the fact that we will be talking about some of the most important things to consider to have a comfortable retirement. Hope your morning is off to a great start. You're listening to Dollars and Cents. My name is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning, and the radio station that we're airing on this morning on a beautiful Sunday morning in Central Florida is News Radio 93.1 WFLA, simulcasting over there on the AM dial at 540 AM. We're on video. We're getting better on that. This is week 3 of our video exercise, so we're getting better at splicing and dicing and all those kinds of things. Wearing my Florida Gator tie this morning. And if you missed that game, my goodness, what a game it was against Miami. And kudos to the city beautiful and the Central Florida region as well. What a great opportunity to spotlight the uniqueness that is Central Florida to the nation. And certainly in downtown Orlando, there was a lot going on last night. Not just that game at Camping World Stadium, but also there was a soccer game being played like a block away from that. And then another sort of half a block away in the other direction, there was a concert at Amway Center. My understanding is it was the New Kids on the Block. I'm like, wait a minute, I know that group from when I was younger. But apparently they are still going strong. So you had a ton of events in downtown Orlando. What a great opportunity to be in this area and in this community with all of that excitement going on. Really something for everybody last night in Orlando. But the game itself at Camping World was one of those games that I think the broadcast media, particularly the folks on ESPN, could not have hoped for a better game given all the back and forth and the big plays and the fumbles and the outcome of the game being unknown really until the very end. That's what the folks in media always like and appreciate. So, given that the Gators sort of pulled it out or won by battle of attrition, we're wearing the orange and blue this morning, which is kind of odd because to put it on. I was like, well, wait a minute. My wife, I went to University of Maine, so that's a whole different. Okay, we have hockey up there. Ground's too cold and too frozen most of the year to actually play football. It's like concrete up there. And my wife went to University of Florida, which is why I became sort of a Gator by marriage. But I'm sending money to Auburn University, which is where my oldest started a couple of weeks ago. So. Not really sure where my allegiances lie. It may have to ultimately lie with where the old pocketbook goes. So I may have to find myself an Auburn tie instead of the orange and blue. But certainly a great opportunity and a great showcase for the City Beautiful in Central Florida yesterday, being the host of that game. Speaking of fun things like that, don't you want to have a fun retirement? And so on the program today, we want to start to highlight some of the things that are going to be important in order for you to have fun and to be comfortable in retirement. And to start the conversation, it really begins with taking a look at the type of lifestyle that you are living. The lifestyle pre-retirement should be a lifestyle that is sustainable in retirement as well. So don't think that your lifestyle is somehow going to get more conservative once you get into retirement. When somebody says that to me in the office, oh, well, Joel, I won't be doing as much. I won't spend as much. I'll be all right. The reality is, what concerns us there is that you're going to have a lot more free time on your hands. And so what that means is, when people have free time on their hands, is they generally will spend money. And whether it's playing around the golf or taking a trip to see the grandkids or whatever the case may be, all of that requires money. So this notion that you're going to somehow experience a downgrade or a shift in retirement really isn't an approach that you want to be taking, because history says that it's very difficult to sort of make that shift. If you've been living your life a certain way, doing stuff a certain way, then to expect that once you retire and have more time on your hands, that all of a sudden you're going to start to do it differently, that is a little bit of a stretch. That's why we think that traditional rule that you hear people talk about of, in retirement, you want to replace 80% of your income, is not really a good rule of thumb to follow. The reality is that you want to be looking at replacing 100% of your income in retirement, along with the fact that in retirement there are expenses that you sort of lose track of that are new to retirement. Chief among those is that in retirement, you're going to have to be responsible for making sure that your taxes get paid. It's no longer your employer withholding taxes and taking care of all of that for you. You've got to make sure that your taxes are part of your overall retirement plan, because they're still going to be there in retirement. And then number two is the expense that sort of people often forget as well, which is the simple fact that in retirement, you're going to have to pay for health insurance, for health care. And more often than not, your employer probably pays for that now. But in retirement, you're going to have to be the one responsible for that. And we talk a lot about this in the office. If you're under the age of 65, which means that you are under the age of qualifying for Medicare, that can be a pretty pricey amount of money. Not uncommon that for a family of two, for a married couple, that number could be $1,300, $1,400, even $1,500 if you're in your early 60s. That's a big line item that you've got to make sure to include in your budget. So this notion of, I'm going to all of a sudden change my living or change what I do, and that's going to allow me to retire on kind of less money than what I'm currently bringing in, I would encourage you to rethink that. It's really got to be almost an exact match for the income that you're currently making, because most people won't change their lifestyle. And in fact, you'll find that you're spending more on your free time expense, and then you roll in income taxes, and you roll in the cost of health insurance, and those two can really start to add to the mix. So it's so important to make sure that you have an understanding and a handle on what the expenses are going to look like. Another thing to really consider and think about in that regard is that you've got to also understand that Social Security can't be your only source of income. If you look at Social Security in isolation, it was only intended to generate no more than 40% of one's retirement income. So that means that you're still very much responsible for the other 60%. And so to be thinking that it's just going to be Social Security and I'm going to be fine, you've really got to understand that Social Security is really only intended to be a portion of that income in retirement. So those are some of the things, the key things to be thinking about when you are thinking about retirement in order to have a comfortable retirement. We've got some more thoughts that we want to share with you on this topic as well. But we'll slide to the break. And then during the break, we've also got open lines. We figured out how to fix the whole voice thing when callers call in on the video this week, so that's good. We're making progress on this stuff. And so consequently, the numbers to call in, 407-916-5400, toll free 1-866-916-5400, or you can also send us an email. That email, Joel, Joel, at NelsonFinancialPlanning.com. We'll be back right after these messages here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning News Radio 93.1 WFLA. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Talking on the program today about things to be thinking about in order to make sure that you are, in fact, comfortable in retirement. First of all, dispelling sort of the notion of, well, if I retire with 80% of my income, then I'll be fine. Not in today's world. You probably want to be retiring with projected to replace all of your income. You've got things like free time expense, which is when you have free time, you spend money. You've got income taxes to worry about, and probably the biggest worry, and oftentimes the biggest single expense item for retirees, is the cost of healthcare. So those three things mean, hey, I got to worry about replacing 100% of this, and certainly can't rely on Social Security. That was only intended to replace about 40% of one's income. So you've got to count on the other 60%. How do you do that? Well, the reality is it's actually a somewhat simple formula. It's save as much as you can as early as you can. I'll repeat that again because it's pretty complex. Save as much as you can as early as you can. Now, what do we mean by that? The reality is that you're going to have other things in life that will present themselves, i.e. kids, that are going to cost money as you get older. And one of the biggest things that you're going to face, particularly when you're about 10 years or so from retirement, or maybe closer to retirement, depending upon when you had kids, is things like college expenses. We know that personally because we're paying college expenses. The reality is that those are the kinds of expenses where, for that period of time, the reality is you may have to back off your savings during those years where you have those higher dollar expenditures. The same thing could be said if you have a health issue that requires you to take some time off from work, or requires you to pay more than you expected in terms of being able to cover that healthcare cost. Those are the things that can come along the way. The list is long, right? A hurricane that blows the roof off, and you've got to, then turn around and pay a lot more money than you ever anticipated paying. So there are those things that are going to happen along the way that for a while you may have to back off your savings for retirement. That's why it's so important to do it as early as possible, so that when those things happen that you need to back off a little bit to cover those other things that are costing a bunch of money at a particular point in time, then you have at least a good nest egg that is going to be building and compounding and growing over an extended period of time. Remember, when it comes to achieving investment results, it's not timing. Too many people get way too hung up on, I got to get in at the right point. The market's high, the market's low. I got to get in here, I got to get in there. It's this person is the president, that person's. Look, there's tons of excuses. The reality is that investment results are achieved over time. So it's not your timing, it is your time in that makes all the difference in terms of how do you accrue a sum of money that's going to be sufficient enough to help generate out retirement income when you get to that stage. And that's where it's important as well to also look at the investment allocation, right? If I'm in retirement or approaching retirement, then clearly my investment objective has got to change from growth, which is what it was all the years that I was accumulating money, to sort of shift over to more of a growth and income orientation. Now, be careful. You don't want to get too far over on a fixation of the income side of things because inflation is real, taxes are real, and the fact of the matter is that all of those mean that you've got to have an ever increasing amount of income over the course of your retirement in order to offset those. So be careful on shifting the allocation too much, but certainly when you're approaching retirement to get to something that looks more like a growth and income type of allocation certainly makes sense in order to then generate out an income, but yet at the same time being able to get some additional growth on top of that to offset things like inflation as well. One of the key things that that people often forget is to really run an analysis when you're talking about retirement and you're a couple. It's important to sort of run a what if analysis, and I think folks often forget this. Is when you're a couple, you are retiring as a couple, and that means that your expenses and your income represent a combined picture. So what happens if one or the other passes away? How much does that affect your overall retirement picture? It's so important to sort of run those numbers and go through the what ifs of, okay, here's where we are. We're retiring. Here's what the picture looks like. But what if one of you passes away? Then what happens? Or what if the other one passes away? Then what happens? I think far too often people sort of forget that part of the retirement analysis. And it's pretty crucial because odds are you're not going to die at the same time. And the reality is one of you may very well live many years past the death of the other one. So important to kind of look at and run the numbers and do the analysis on what happens to that income that's coming in. How much does my Social Security go down? Because it will go down, because the reality is that one of you, the person that remains, is most likely either going to lose their benefit and step up, or is just going to retain their benefit and lose the other one's Social Security. So there's definitely some things that are on Social Security that are going to change your retirement income that require you to kind of think that through long before you get to retirement. How is that income going to be made up if one of you passes away? And I think that's a piece of the retirement planning conversation that oftentimes gets overlooked that becomes very important. Another thing that we see a lot of is folks relocating. And that comes with an expense of shifting and relocating and reestablishing yourself in a new area. It's important to also be thinking about how that plays out in terms of the expenses and how the numbers play out as well. We just had somebody this past week that was talking about, when I retire, I'm going to move and I'm going to move to the Caribbean, and I'm going to sell my house and I'm going to do this. And then you start to kind of run those numbers and make sure that you're able to do that in such a way where it doesn't change your monthly expenses. So it's really important also when you're getting to retirement or you're thinking about retirement, in order to have that retirement that you want, that you've got to also consider at the end of the day, if I want to live someplace else, I better have the ability to be able to make that shift and have it not change my income or my expenses that I need in retirement. So it's so important to kind of think about those types of sort of wrinkles, if you will, that could happen during the course of retirement. You certainly want to be able to have those in as part of your overall retirement plan. Chief among those is really that concept of running the numbers and seeing what happens during the course of retirement if one of you passes away. Far too often, I think people get surprised when one passes just how much that changes the overall income picture. Certainly, expenses will go down a little bit, but not as much as you might think. So it's important to have an understanding of that what if situation. What if this person passes? What if that person passes? Then what happens? And what's the strategy for making sure that that income winds up continuing on in the same form and fashion? We're at the bottom half of the hour already, which means that we will take a break. And then when we get back, we're going to talk about what combination of retirement accounts can I have. We talk about the IRA, we talk about the Roth, we talk about those plans that are available through your employer, like a 401k, 403b, those types. But the reality is there's a combination that you can have that ultimately allows you to save more for retirement. We'll cover that, plus take your calls at 407-916-5400, toll free 1-866-916-5400. Also be checking email during the break at joel@nelsonfinancialplanning.com. That's how you can get in touch with us. And we'll be back after these messages here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning, News Radio 93.1 WFLA. Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Dollars and Cents here on News Radio 93.1. This is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. During the break, we were able to successfully check email, but now it's a little bit harder because the email is on the phone and the phone is recording. So I'm like, how do I kind of get on that and shift and then make sure it's all set up correctly? But we were able to do that, and we noticed that we had an email from Roy. And Roy asked us, and I actually have to write it out longhand, so we got to kind of figure out a better way to do that. But anyway, he is asking about once your required minimum distributions start, you obviously can't turn the RMD distribution into any 401k or IRA. I might add directly. You can't do that. However, you could roll that over into a Roth. And the answer, Roy, is you certainly could, but I want to talk a little bit more about that, because when you take your required minimum distribution, it becomes taxable income. So there's no way you're going to avoid that, as you point out in your email. However, if you are still working, right, then you would take your required minimum distribution from the IRAs, because you have to take them from the IRAs. But if you're still working, you don't have to take it from your 401k. And in fact, you could use the money from a cash flow perspective. This is where it gets a little tricky. Your 401k contributions would have to come through your paycheck. But if you got your required minimum distribution, that would just come as cash to you. So you may have to kind of shift some money around in order to kind of keep your cash flow the same. But the reality is that with the required minimum distribution now in hand, what you could then turn around and do is increase your contributions to your 401k if you are still actively working. And so that's one great way to be able to do that. Also remember that you don't have to take a required minimum distribution on the 401k either. Now, you mentioned about being able to take that required minimum distribution, and that would be obviously taxable. But then in essence, you could really take that money and turn around and fund a Roth with it. And certainly that is the case. I mean, it's not quite those exact. You can use those same dollars effectively, but the Roth obviously would not come with a tax deduction. The caveat to all of that is that in order to fund a Roth, just like the rule was to fund an IRA or a 401k, is you need earned income. You must still be working in some capacity in order to fund a retirement account, whether it be a traditional or a Roth. So, Roy, I like your strategy. Hey, I've got to take the required minimum distribution. It's something that I've got to do. What can I at least do to make sure that I'm getting some tax preference on that going forward? Certainly turning around and taking those same dollars and putting them in a Roth would certainly accomplish that. I'm assuming that you're still working because that's the only way in which to do that. If you are still working and you have a 401k available to you through your employer, then certainly you could also increase the contributions that you're putting into that, which would, in that case, sort of offset the tax implications on that required minimum distribution. So, Roy, great question. I'm glad you brought it up on the program today. Speaking of what's the newest and latest, I mean, obviously, last week the market seemed like it was on track until about Friday, and then we had a series of commentary and tweets back and forth that certainly threw the markets off for the week. Last week, the Dow was down a total of 380 odd points, so not a particularly dramatic week, but certainly Friday was the main contributor to this. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of getting tired of politics already, and we've still got 14 months, maybe 15, 14 months before the next election. I'm rapidly coming to the conclusion that every politician in America is just absolutely crazy. I mean, I can't help that. We got one side that says we want to go more of a socialist bend and somehow give everything to everybody, but no one's explained how they're actually going to pay for that. And then the other side is trying to get us back to more of a isolated protectionist sort of view. Anyway, I don't want to get political. That's not the point of the show. But boy, I'm beginning to think that in order to be in politics in America today, you basically have to have a lobotomy. That applies to both sides of the aisle, for sure. Anyway, let's talk about the combination of accounts that you can have. Roy's email is certainly on point with this to a certain extent in terms of there's always a combination that you can have that people often get confused about. They think, oh, I've got a plan at work, so that means that I can't have a separate account. The reality is that you absolutely can have a separate account, but there's certainly some parameters and some things that you need to be aware of. First and foremost, if your employer offers a 401k or similar type of plan, we encourage you to participate in that. Nothing is simpler, nothing is easier than having that money automatically taken out of your paycheck so you don't even see it, right? It doesn't come into the checking account and then, oh, I'm going to take it out after that. It comes out right out of the gate so you never see that money. That's one of the reasons why we're as big of fans of making those contributions to your employer plan, because it's money that you don't see. It's money that gets saved that doesn't cross through your checkbook. The reality is as well that a lot of employers will still offer some type of matching, and that's important to be able to do that. Now, here's the thing, and there's often confusion on this. Just because you're making the contribution to your 401k that sort of matches the amount of the employer match, that isn't the limit of what you can do. The limit of what you can do is, in fact, much more than that. In today's numbers, you can contribute a total of $19,000, and if you're over 50, you can contribute an additional $6,000 on top of that. So that's a total of $25,000 that you could be putting in. Very rarely do you see where employers will restrict you to the point where you're not able to put all of that money in. Certainly there's some rules for highly compensated employees that could come into play, but those generally don't affect the vast majority of people. If you're really looking to try and maximize out your retirement, going back to that concept of save as much as you can, as early as you can to have the most comfortable retirement, pretty simple, straightforward formula there. And the reality is then that 401k gives you the opportunity to be able to do that all the way up to $25,000. Now, once you've maxed that out, or if you're restricted and can't quite max it out because of other issues like being a highly compensated employee, then you can look at the other option of funding either an IRA or a Roth. The reality is, though, that depending upon whether you're doing the IRA or the Roth, is a function of sort of where you are in terms of your income. And so consequently, you have to look at your total income in order to determine your eligibility to be able to fund either an IRA or a Roth. But here's the important concept. The limit, which is $6,000 on those types of accounts. If you're over 50, there's an extra 1,000, so you get to do 7,000. You can't do 7,000 in an IRA and then turn around and do 7,000 in the Roth. The aggregate amount that you put into those types of accounts, individual retirement accounts, has got to stay below that $7,000. So if you want to do some in an IRA, some in a Roth, that's fine. But know that the total amount that you're putting into those two accounts can't be over $7,000. So that's important to kind of keep in mind when you're thinking about, okay, what's the combination of accounts that I can have? And at the end of the day, what's the ability of me to be able to fund those types of accounts? It really depends upon income. We'll hit sort of those income parameters when we get back from the break. So we'll slide to the break, and then we will come back and kind of give you those income parameters to kind of keep in mind when you're thinking about, okay, what can I do to fund my retirement, to have as comfortable a retirement as possible. Also, open lines here at the studio, 407-916-5400, toll free 866-916-5400. We'll also attempt to check email once again on the phone/camera. The email, joel@nelsonfinancialplanning.com. So we'll be back here on Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris, Nelson Financial Planning, News Radio 93.1 WFLA. Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dollars and Cents with your host, Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. On the program today, we've covered a lot of territory, as we do each and every week, and talked a little bit about some of the things to be thinking about when it comes to having a comfortable retirement. I want to stress the importance of really taking a look at the analysis of what happens when one of the couple passes away. Those are some of the numbers that you really want to dig into a little bit in terms of seeing what's going to happen and how that income is going to be replaced. And certainly to enter into retirement with the expectation of, hey, I'm going to need to replace 100% of my income. The traditional rule of, I'll replace 80% really doesn't work in today's world, particularly with increased healthcare costs. That's probably one of the biggest expenses for most retirees is how on earth are they going to pay for that healthcare cost? That seems to be an ever-increasing problem in the course of trying to plan for retirement. Also talked a little bit about this combination of accounts that you can have and some of the things to be thinking about when it comes to trying to save as much for retirement. First place to start is obviously with what your employer offers, simply because that makes it easy. It comes out of the paycheck, and you never have to see that hit your checking account and then do something with it after. It's almost like it's completely out of sight, and so consequently, funding that 401k is always a good idea. And certainly the funding limits are quite high these days. It's not like it was 20 years ago where the limits, when the numbers were much, much lower. The reality is, though, that in today's world, you're able to fund $19,000 a year into a 401k. If you're over age 50, you can do another $6,000 on top of that. So that's a total of $25,000. So certainly that's a great place to start. However, if you want to do more than that, then certainly you can look at doing an IRA or Roth. Remember there, the combination, the $6,000 you can put into those types of accounts, plus the extra $1,000 if you're over 50, so for a total of $7,000. That's an aggregate combination across those accounts. So you can't do $7,000 in an IRA and $7,000 in a Roth, but you could do $3,500 in an IRA and $3,500 in a Roth. Now, the important thing to remember when you're looking at trying to fund those accounts as well is your eligibility. And your eligibility is chiefly dependent upon how much income you make. There's a there's a parameter that has to come into play, particularly if you've got an employer who's offering a retirement account. Then you've really got to look at the income in order to determine whether you have the ability to make a contribution to an IRA and get a tax deduction, or whether you've got to do the Roth, or in fact, you may not be eligible to do a Roth if you're above a certain income limit. In those particular cases, there is still a solution. And that solution is a little convoluted, but here's how it works out. If you have, if your income is such that you're above the limit in terms of being able to fund a Roth, one of the things that you could do is you could do a non-deductible IRA, because there's no income limit on putting money into an IRA, particularly if you're not going to take the tax deduction for it. So when you do that, then you're able to put money into an IRA regardless of the amount of income that you have. Now, here's the thing that really makes it unique. Back in the day, and this was probably now 5 or 6 years ago, you were restricted on your ability to convert an IRA to a Roth. You had to have below a certain income level. And in fact, back then, and I think it was almost 9 years ago now that I'm thinking about it, I think it was 2010 when the rule changed. Back then, you had to have less than $100,000 to make that conversion of income. So that was a pretty low threshold, particularly when you consider that when you do a conversion, the amount of money that you're converting actually comes in as income on your tax return. That's why generally we're not necessarily big fans of conversions. But in this particular case, if you're trying to be able to fund a retirement account and you're above the income parameter for being able to do that, then one of the things that you could do is you could fund an IRA, a non-deductible IRA. So you're not going to get a tax deduction for it. But then, because there's no income threshold on your ability to do a conversion to a Roth, what you could do is you could immediately, one day, day one, you fund the IRA. The next day, day two, you immediately take that IRA that you've put that contribution in and do a conversion over to a Roth. Now, because it was the very next day, chances are it probably didn't move that dramatically. And so consequently, you wouldn't have to pay any taxes on that conversion of that contribution because you didn't take a tax deduction on it. Because you didn't take a tax deduction on that contribution to that IRA, then that's original basis. That's a capital contribution. And in that case, you don't have to have the tax implications on that. And so consequently then, you're able to do the conversion over to the Roth and in essence pay no taxes and wind up with a Roth. That is a clearly through the back door kind of example, but it's one that certainly exists under the tax laws today. So remember that option to be able to fund a retirement account beyond just what your employer offers, even if you are above the income parameters that allows you to do that, then this notion of doing an IRA and doing it as a non-deductible IRA, so you're not going to get any tax benefit on it, which means that the money that you put in basically remains of an after-tax nature, and then immediately, so you don't run into any issues in terms of I gotta pay taxes, or I gotta pay a penalty if I'm under 59 and a half. Immediately the very next day, and oftentimes what we recommend people to do is just simply park it in a money market or something like that for that one day. So there's virtually no fluctuations. You don't have anything to really have to worry about or report on your taxes. Park it in a money market account, and then the next day shift it over to a Roth, and at that point get it invested. That's a great way to be able to do that through the back door, and only available because the rules changed on when you could do a Roth conversion. Again, a lot of people out there think that the rule has not changed. The rule changed a few years ago that allows you to do that conversion with that IRA that's immaterial of what your income is. The old rule was you had to have less than $100,000. that rule has gone away. So that really opens up the door to do these Roth contributions, in essence, through the back door, but they're really framed in such a way as to be a Roth conversion. But because you made the contribution on a non-deductible basis to the IRA, then, and guess what? There's no real tax implications to do it. So a fascinating way to be able to do the Roth even when you weren't able to do it. And it's interesting. It's now been with us, if my memory serves me correct, this goes back to 2010. It's now been with us for 9 years, but yet it is a loophole that the folks up in Washington have not closed. So it's a great option if you want to really maximize out your savings. You've maximized out what your employer offers, and then you want to do something more beyond that of a tax-favored basis. Certainly being able to do the IRA or the Roth or even this IRA/Roth kind of option if your income is such that you're not eligible to do the IRA or the Roth on their own. This IRA to Roth is a great option for folks in those types of circumstances. So make sure to sort of check that out in terms of the features that you can have to be able to understand you've got all of these different types of accounts out there and what the income limitations are and what the contribution levels are. Certainly, there's some good options out there if you know how to do it. And this IRA Roth thing is a pretty interesting one that really is a loophole that certainly has some value to the extent you want to try and maximize out your retirement savings. So some interesting stuff there. And we are about ready to wrap it on up and get on out of here. We hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. We'll put the video, splice it all together because we do it in segments. We splice it all together so you don't have to kind of have ad time or anything like that when you're looking at it on places like YouTube and the like. So we'll do that. We'll post it on up tomorrow. You'll see me with my gator tie. And enjoy the rest of the Sunday. You've been listening to Dollars and Cents with your host. That's me, Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning, News Radio 93.1 WFLA.